In this video, we will look further into fish and their role in understanding dyscalculia. As was mentioned in the previous step, if you want to study the genetic behind mathematical abilities, you might benefit from a faster growing species, such as fish. Scandalous? Not at all. Did you know that with a zebrafish we share at least 70% of our genes? Less than 30% make the difference between Einstein and a small fish. Let's see some advantages in using fish as a model. They have sufficient physiological complexity and high physiological homology to humans. There is ease of genetic manipulation. Fish reproduce quickly and abundantly. They experience a rapid development as they hatch in less than 3 days and become mature by day 90, making them helpful in studying neurodevelopmental disorders. There is high space and cost efficiency and excellent potential for screening. And lastly, fish have smaller brains, which can be better assessed using the newest imaging techniques. Most studies of numerical ability in fish have been done at the University of Padua. Everything started during my PhD in 2004. Let's see how we taught fish to distinguish between the number 2 versus the number 3. Fish were inserted in a small tank with 2 doors, and the only way to join their conspecifics was passing through the door marked with 3 elements rather than the one with only 2, where they couldn't pass. If they wanted to reach the conspecific outside, they would have to learn that only one tunnel, the one associated to a given numerosity of dots, is the one that would permit them to rejoin their social companions. We then controlled for non-numerical variables, so some stimuli were controlled for the overall area of the objects, which means that the quantity of black was the same in both groups. Another set was controlled for the overall luminance. A third set was controlled for the overall perimeter, and others for the convex hull, which is the overall space occupied by the most lateral items. By using this procedure, we found for the very first time in the literature that fish can use numerical information. While showing that a fish has numerical abilities is important, it still isn't enough to develop an animal model for dyscalculia. We need more. We need to show that the cognitive mechanisms underlying fish and humans are at least similar. How? By looking at their performance in similar tasks. What does it mean? If something is easy for human and easy for fish, and something else is difficult for both species, we may suppose that the 2 species share similar cognitive skills. For this reason, we compare fish and human performance by presenting exactly the same stimuli. We had 2 experiments. In the experiment 1, we studied the role of total numerosity of the items. Basically, we always had the same numerical ratio, 1:2. And based on this ratio, we presented 4 versus 8, 15 versus 30, and 100 versus 200. So what changed here is the total numerosity of the items. We want to see whether the performance decreases while increasing the total numerosity, whether there is an upper limit. In another experiment, we presented a similar number of items, from 20 to 21, but we changed the numerical ratio, from a 1/2 ratio, where you have 7 versus 14, to a 3/4 ratio, where you have 9 versus 12. And we found that for fish the total numerosity is irrelevant, meaning that discriminating 4 versus 8 is as easy as 100 versus 200. But in contrast, numerical ratio is important, and discriminating a 1/2 ratio is easier than a 3/4 ratio. Once we were able to observe the performance of fish, we then present to humans exactly the same stimuli, using a fast numerosity judgment to prevent the use of verbal counting. And these were the results. The numerical system of humans and fish don't have an upper limit, meaning that we can discriminate even hundreds of elements with a 1/2 ratio, while our accuracy depends on the numerical ratio. See, fish can not only use numbers, but they also apparently use similar mechanisms to quantify objects, a fact that has been covered by important media such as the National Geographic. Another way to assess similarities in numerical competence between humans and animals consists in assessing whether animals also have ordinal abilities. Ordinality is the capacity to locate an object on the basis of its numerical position. And this ability can be very useful in nature. For instance, a bear can find food either by using special information, such as the overall distance from the starting point, or by enumerating the trees. So food is not behind the first tree, nor behind the second one, but behind the third tree. We investigated this issue in guppies. This was the apparatus. We want to see if they could find a particular feeder in a series of identical ones using only ordinal information. This was the view from above. In detail, in experiment 1, feeders were placed one after the other in the direction of the current. Food was inserted only in the third feeder, so we inserted the yellow plates above all the feeders, and fish were free to enter the experimental area and remove only one plate. To prevent the possibility that fish could have used special cues, different special arrangements were presented, so that fish could only use ordinal information. We changed the orientation of the feeders, this time in a row perpendicular to the subject, and the results were much clearer. Subjects selected the third feeder more than by chance, and they didn't select the second or the fourth feeder. So here, Guppy seems to use ordinal information. But we didn't stop here. We then asked which information is spontaneously encoded by fish. I mean, in the previous experiment, fish were prevented from using special cues, but maybe in nature they use them. So which is spontaneous for fish to use, special or ordinal cues? To address this issue, we set up an experiment where, in the training phase, both ordinal and special cues were available, by keeping feeders at the same distance. Then, in the test phase, we put in contrast ordinal and special information to see which information they use. For example, in the test phase, if guppies use ordinal information, they were expected to select this one or this one if they use special information. And we found that fish use both information, although they seem to prefer ordinal information. And indeed, there is a significant difference between the two conditions. In summary, guppies can be trained to use ordinal information, and when left free to use ordinal and/or special cues, they show the ability to use both. The University of Trento, with Professor Valor Tigara, and the Queen Mary University of London, with Professor Brennan, have combined their efforts to study the genetic of numerical abilities in the species model zebrafish. The project is still in progress, and unfortunately we cannot summarize the detail here. But anyway, what is clear is that fish have become the current experimental tool to understand the genetic of dyscalculia. We need to identify genes and assess the relative contribution of the environment in controlled laboratory conditions. This is the main contribution of fish in the comprehension of the building blocks of our mathematical abilities. The road is long, but I believe we are on the right path.